Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host.
All right, Peter and Brian. I think in this episode, I'm going to refrain from having a normal intro, and this is going to be the intro. So for those who don't know, the announcement here is that Brian's taking over Parsity, which is the code school we run. Some people, I think, listen to the podcast and don't care about the code school, and that's fine. But also that means you're taking over the podcast as the new host, which is super exciting. I want to, first of all, tell everybody, before we get all mushy and talk about how blah, blah, blah awesome this is and how great Brian is and everything, that they can expect not much to change in terms of like the quality and the content and even my presence. I told Brian I'm here whenever, if he wants to have me on or have me do an episode, because I still love doing the podcast and it's been an incredible journey to be on the podcast. So we can get into all of that. But the first thing I wanted to lay down here is who Brian is. I think everyone knows, by the way, Brian, because you've done a
couple episodes.
Yeah, you've done a couple episodes now, which has been awesome. But all the while, the thing that we were working on then that we didn't tell everybody was having everything transition over to you. And I think we talk about the story about how that happened and everything too. But I think one of the more exciting pieces of this for me has been thinking about the perspective you bring and the voice you have. And just the experience. I think anyone can go check out Brian's LinkedIn and see in his newsletter. He told me the open rate on his newsletter is like 50%, which is, he didn't know, but it's ridiculous. It's because the content is so good that I can't imagine this podcast won't be 10 times better this time next year because
Appreciate that.
And like, if Peter and I are honest, we probably like didn't spend a ton of time thinking or planning about podcast episodes. So
that's true.
I'm pretty neurotic, so I probably will spend a lot of time thinking about exactly what I'll be saying.
I mean, even if you just do episodes about your LinkedIn, that'd be great. But Brian, where should we go first? Like, what's the first thing we should like talk about or cover here?
Maybe about you, about what's going on in your life and what led you to this decision point.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'll try not to ramble because maybe I was just teeing it up for you to ask me about me. So I talked about me. No, so all right, quick recap of my journey, because I do want to contextualize all of this to say that, so I started doing boot camps, obviously, when I went to one in 2013. And I worked for 1 year as a software engineer. And then I quit to start another boot camp. And I've basically been starting boot camps since then. And so for me, transitioning out of doing that was just a desire to take on something new. I think and to be honest with you, like for so many years, even though like the in-person boot camps worked in terms of people like getting jobs, like they didn't work as a business to run until the pandemic happened, unfortunately, and we had to go online. And Parsity was such a smooth, enjoyable experience. But I think at that point, I'd been ready for something new. And to give you context for why something new, my family and I moved last year to Austin. And to be real, I was curious about crypto at the time. And so one thing I haven't explained to everybody is that since August of last year, I've been working with Coinbase. So if you're into crypto, you know what Base is. And if you follow Base on Twitter, you'll see that Base launched the bootcamp, which is my project, which is cool. So I launched a Web3 bootcamp, which if you've been listening to the podcast for a long time, you also know that I previously launched a Web3 bootcamp that failed. But it's, at Coinbase, it's kind of hard to fail because they have more money than I did. And they can pay me to do the bootcamp, even though the bootcamp's free. So that's what I've been up to. And yeah, in this next season, I think also one thing I wanted to mention that I think you and I have talked about quite a bit, Peter, in these episodes is last year I realized I was doing way too many things at once. Like I just had like this, I don't know if it's ambition, but just this like curiosity that just went in 1,000 directions, like launching 90 Days of Action, which is like this goal setting group. Obviously I was doing stuff at Coinbase. I started Freed Up, which is like the virtual assistant business. We were doing this. Peter and I talked about, I read Alex Hormozy's like $100 million offers, just thinking about all kinds of crazy things. And I had to take a step back and think like, what's the next step for me? Can I have a season where I just focus on one thing? And moving to Austin, where we're making all new friends. My oldest is 9 now, which is crazy to me. Like he has his own life. It's like, I need a season where I can kind of step back and just do one thing. So I slowly started like peeling the layers off. And I think I'm almost to the point now with Brian taking over Parsity where I can just like work at Coinbase for a little bit. And not write things on LinkedIn and not try and be Superman and try to help people like a normal person, not through like a program. But anyway, so that's me. Real quick on the story of finding Brian, and then I want to also hear about Peter and what's next. Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I thought about who could take Parsity over for me, originally I was thinking like, oh, maybe I'd sell Parsity to like some other boot camp, which sounds just super lame to me. And I didn't want that. And to be honest with you, I made a list of 3 people. I think that was it, that I knew from LinkedIn. I didn't know if they were cool people or not. And Brian was one of them. And I had Jamie, who, basically runs Parsity. Let's be real, my assistant. I said, hey, will you set up calls with these 3 people? And the first call was with Brian. And I just like explained to him my crazy idea, which was, do you want to come like run this boot camp with me, help me build curriculum? I've seen your stuff on LinkedIn. Your content's amazing, at least. I don't know you. And he was like, yeah, actually, that sounds pretty good. And like, that was kind of it. We just kind of slowly work towards this. Like, you've been writing curriculum for like months now for Parsity, which hopefully that will be released soon, which is super exciting. So yeah, there's probably much more to the story than that, but I just do not think there's another person. And I mean this, I'm not just like fluffing you up, Brian, but I'm like, between your story, the perspective you have from your journey, and then now like the way that you are able to engage with your audience and write about those kinds of things and teach. And I think the main thing is just like, you have this passion to literally help people do this. And I have that too, but I've been in it for so long that I feel almost like, not jaded is the word, but it's almost like I just feel tired and I need to like take a little bit of a break, and then come back to it with something else fresh, And I'm like, oh man, there's a good foundation here. Brian is going to like blow this thing up with so many people. So anyway, I'm done with my monologue, but
well, I really appreciate that.
That's
Thank
my
you
perspective.
for saying that. Yeah,
it's true. All right, Peter, let's talk about you. What's been happening in your life? What led you, I think, first of all, like what led you to like doing the podcast with me in the beginning? Because you were doing the YouTube channel, which Brian just commented on before we started recording, which is super awesome. You were like in the learn to code space that we've all talked about before. But you're kind of transitioning a little bit. Is that okay to say? And I'm curious what's led to that.
Yeah. So I'll start with the first question. So why did the podcast? Actually, too meta for this maybe, but I've made a YouTube video about why I decided to do this podcast, so people can go back and find that.
Now you have a podcast on why you did the YouTube channel. Can we do that?
We could do that next, I guess. But essentially the thinking, so at that point I was very into something we've talked about a lot, which is like this small bets philosophy from Daniel Vassallo. So I thought, and this is like, if I recall correctly, more or less around the same time when I decided to leave 9-to-5 employment as a software engineer and try to make it as a freelancer, I figured if nothing else, like it's another small bet. It is a way to attract serendipity, and just kind of one of those things where you don't know what'll come from it. Also, we get along and it's fun to talk. So figured it, if nothing else, just an excuse to hang out and chat about the things that we've talked about. And so from that perspective, it's been a great decision and I've really enjoyed it. And it's crazy. Like, it's so hard to make a podcast work, and I don't know what exactly it is. I think partly, Spotify's search algorithm, partly our backgrounds, partly, who knows what. The podcast has worked. And so it's been really interesting to see people reaching out on LinkedIn or YouTube, like, hey, I found the podcast. Thanks so much. This has really helped me. And it gives me the same feeling that I get when people say that on YouTube comments. It's great that it's resonating with people and that it's been helpful. So I've really appreciated doing it, and thankful to all the listeners, and it's been great to be a part of it. So that's that. So from a what's going on in my life perspective, kind of similar to Aaron in a lot of ways, where I've been kind of in an evolution of sorts that I think really started probably during the pandemic, but definitely took a big shift when I decided to leave traditional employment. And something that's kind of been bubbling beneath the surface that I think is probably intuitively obvious to our listeners is that we have a lot of interests other than coding. And in fact, when we do our kind of hang out and talk episodes, like my understanding is Aaron's gotten some feedback where it's kind of been like, hey, could y'all talk about coding more? And I love coding.
I think we said in one of the episodes, I was like, email us if you like have feedback for what we've been talking about. And Jamie said like immediately we got emails. People were like, yeah, please go back to talking some more about coding stuff.
It's just so funny. And I get that, I think. But the reality is that I think there's largely like two big perspectives on coding. One is kind of like a craftsman mindset, I would call it. I've made a YouTube video about this, by the way. Yeah, one's like a craftsman mindset where the code is an end in itself. So I've had, honestly, my best colleagues are from a software engineering perspective, kind of more in this bucket, where it's like they just love playing around with new technology and love just coding to code, like code for its own sake. Then there's another group, which is like code as a means to an end, where it's like code is essentially one tool in the tool belt, and you're using it to solve problems. That's where I am, more or less. And I suspect that's kind of where Aaron is, though I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, for sure.
And
Brian,
so,
where are you at? Just curious.
I love to play around. I'm like always doing side projects and like messing around with things. So I just get really driven by doing all the cool kid stuff with like JavaScript frameworks and libraries still. Yeah,
that's what I suspected. And I think that's why this is going to be really good for Parsity.
And the podcast.
In the podcast, yeah, because the reality is like I love code. It changed my life, learning to code completely. But I have a lot of other interests. And for me, coding is just one tool in the tool belt among many others. And so for that reason, I think it just becomes hard talking about code all the time if you're interested in other things. And so I feel like, I don't know about you, Aaron, but I've kind of hit my limit of like the things I know to say almost. Like, I feel like I've said everything I can say almost. Like my advice for learning to code wouldn't change that much at that point. I've like given all my frameworks and my philosophies and the things I feel like I've learned. And so, yeah, I mean, I think like from a podcast perspective, it'll be great to have Brian in, kind of from that vantage point. But for myself, like, I think from a career perspective, what I learned like from full-time employment was that for me, like coding is kind of like doing art, but when you do it 9 to 5, it's a little bit more like on an assembly line. And so what I wanted to return to was a little bit more of like a builder's mentality. And I've somewhat been able to do that. But yeah, I guess long story short is like my interests have evolved. And essentially there's a lot of life circumstances that are shaping up to kind of be a little bit different than I expected. So, to be a little bit more specific for our listeners, we've discussed in passing, like I worked some with my in-laws last summer. They're in a summer camp. And so I'm working, more with them now than I was, like more towards like a full-time arrangement. And so there's a lot I could say there, but essentially, I think what I've learned because of learning to code is that I really want to be a business owner and work for myself. And I'm still on that track. That was kind of what I was after when I started freelancing. But more like potentially looking towards doing that with my in-laws at some point. So there's still a lot that's up in the air, but I'm trying to figure out essentially how to apply all these experiences to an industry that is super not technologically savvy. And so, I still feel like I would still call myself a software engineer. I'm still going to write a bunch of code, still want to launch products. But things are not necessarily looking like I'm just going to freelance forever. So anyway, that was a lot of talking. Hope that made sense to the listeners, but that's more or less where I'm at.
Totally. I have two big follow-up thoughts on that, if I could interject.
Yeah,
one would be like, just to clarify so that no one thinks that Peter and I sound like a couple of downers being like, we used to like coding and talking about it and now we don't, we hate it. And, I think more so probably the feeling, you can tell me if I'm wrong, Peter, but I think after talking to you in private a bunch about this, I think the feeling more of moving on isn't like, oh, we're so tired of doing this. It's more of like, holy crap, like we have, thousands and thousands of listeners every month. This is a big responsibility. Like, I want to make sure that we serve this audience the best as possible. And I do think so I just want to clarify that. And I think for me also, by the way, because I think if we keep going, right, like, and that's what's cool, Brian, also about you, like your experience as an engineering manager, like I sort of stopped my career after a year, like everything I know is about helping people find jobs. But when I started doing the Coinbase stuff on the side, like that sort of like stopped my ability to like keep having experiences, not totally, but I didn't really have a lot of new things to explain to people. And that's part of what's hard about creating content sometimes is like, what's cool about you, Brian, is like you're in the thick of it now. You will continue to be, and that helps you like basically have these new experiences. And that's where great content comes from. One other thing I was going to add here is I love that distinction, Peter, between those two different types of people, like one who like see code as a means to an end, and then the other who love the art of it. And I think obviously there's a spectrum probably, and people can, go back and forth between it, and it's not so black and white. But I think one interesting thing about code school graduates, which by the way, we all are, is it brings about folks like Peter and I who did this to get to a spot. And then after we got to that spot, we were then thinking about, great, now what's next? And that's something I think we've talked about a lot, Peter, is like, what's beyond, this huge triumphant experience you've had, which is going from parking cars at a Honda dealership, that was me, to software engineer, to Brian's incredible story, yours, Peter, like you have that feeling, and then you realize that there's more that you can keep on doing. Like you have this agency. I think we talk about that a lot with the podcast because we're talking all about like, how do you develop yourself as an individual, like your own skills, your mindset, your productivity, like how do you become the kind of person who can set big goals and then go achieve them? I think in a lot of ways, like you and I are like literally sort of like in this meta way, like we are like in that reality. Like, whereas like, okay, cool. Becoming a software engineer, I mean, there's a lot of privilege to that too, by the way, but becoming a software engineer is like a huge unlock. Like for a long time, it was like, great, I can pretty much always find a high paying job no matter what. Right. So much so to the point where Peter's like, I quit. I've got so much security that I quit because like, what's going to happen if I don't? And same for me, right? I mean, before I started the Project Shift, the in-person code school in Durham, I went and applied for one job and I got one offer. And I was like, cool, I'm not going to take that job because if I ever want another one, or even like with Coinbase, like that was literally the one opportunity popped up at Coinbase and they like gave it to me. And so, so there's a lot of privilege in that, but also this feeling of, okay, great. Now what can I do? And I think for some people, and I think you and I are maybe unique in that, Peter, not unique, but not unique as in like special, but unique as in like, we happen to be of the same cloth, where it's like that evolution goes to, oh, well, if I can have that much agency over my career and my finances through a job, could I also then like create my own job and have my own agency over that job? And Brian, maybe even like you're experiencing that now too, where it's like, it kind of, when you have a builder's mentality like that, it kind of leads to you building stuff eventually. So I don't know. There's no point in me saying all that. I just was observing that. We talk about that a lot, and it's funny how like that's literally happening to us in some ways.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, yeah, I definitely didn't mean to imply that I'm down on coding. I think learning to code is one of the best things you could ever do.
I was just clarifying for my sake too.
Sure, yeah, but I do think it's a good point that Brian has been, working this whole time as an engineer, and so he's just going to have a lot more experiences from his day-to-day life than, I left work like 2 years ago almost. You left a long time ago, and so
if we all worked at the same company, Brian would be our boss. Like,
right.
he'd probably be our boss.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm still, even running Parsity, I'm still going to continue being an engineering manager and writing code on a daily basis in addition to doing that, which will give me not only content, but I think gives me a good like kind of pulse on what's going on in the industry and kind of the day-to-day activities and things that are going on.
Yeah, and you can, I think, and I think that's something I haven't really voiced much to people. It's like, it's possible, right? Because I think you're going to be doing, there's stuff that anyone can do. I don't mean that in a negative way, but like there's stuff that you can delegate off to other people to help run Parsity. But then there's stuff that only Brian can do. And thankfully you're going to be doing those things. All right. We talked about ourselves a lot, Brian. I want to hear the story from your perspective. What made you be like, yeah, maybe I'll run a code school now.
Right. Yeah. I never would have expected this at all. When you slid in my DMs, like I followed you too, and I respected a lot of what you said. I'm like, oh, Aaron's a cool guy. I think there's a lot of not so great boot camps out there. And when I saw Parsity, I'm like, oh, this is one of the good ones. Like this is when I feel comfortable telling people, yeah, I would go here. There's a few out there. And when you slid into my DMs and kind of offered me this kind of out of the blue, I'm like, wait, is this a real thing? Or, and I was shocked when it was. And then the more I learned about Parsity and you and the podcast and just generally your philosophy on like life, coding and entrepreneurship, I'm like, wait, this seems like an amazing opportunity. The curriculum thing intrigued me just because as a coder, I was like, oh, cool. This is like a chance for me to do like a really cool curriculum, like using Next.js and kind of more cutting edge stuff, which I don't see a lot of boot camps doing or even seeming to really kind of care about. So, and then I thought, my life has changed so much, just like both of yours. I think we all have the same story of like, it unlocked this idea in our heads that's saying, hey, if I could do this, what's next that I can continue to do? I know much of a life-changing this career this can be for people, not only financially, but just the idea that you learn this really tough skill. And then then you begin to think, well, what else am I capable of doing if I can do this thing too? And yeah, I think you have a school that has a strong foundation, all the right reasons you've gotten into it. And it's actually a place I'm proud to attach my name to and looking forward to improving.
Just don't mess it up. All right.
Yeah. That's goal number one.
I'm just kidding. No, I mean, honestly, you're, cause you were already building some stuff, right? You had your own courses that you were creating. Like what?
Oh yeah. I should probably talk. Yeah.
What inspired you like start doing, I mean, you had a successful career as an engineering manager. Like why like start writing on LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So during my whole career, I was also working at boot camps, like on the side. And because I went to a boot camp that taught like HTML and CSS and like some jQuery, and that was it. I didn't know much of my first job. So when I got the opportunity to work at a boot camp as an instructor, which I had no business doing, but I basically used it as a supplement to my education. So here I was always working in boot camps on the side at the same time. And eventually I thought, I probably could teach people this stuff myself too. But I thought there's so much focus on junior people and getting people to learn to code that when I was in my current role, I saw a lot of people leaving. They were failing technical exams. I spent a lot of money, time, energy on preparing for data structure and algorithm type exams. And I thought this is another one of these skills that I could really help people out with and make, available to them. So I started working with some of my coworkers who were leaving to kind of get them more used to technical exams and whiteboarding type interviews. And I kind of monetized that, kind of went after like the mid-level developer crowd or like the junior crowd that was just getting out of a boot camp and saying, hey, here's more stuff that's a little more technically challenging to learn. And I do plan on bringing a lot of that to Parsity as well and offering that to grads and saying, hey, now that you've graduated, here's some additional stuff to keep you motivated and learning some more cutting edge stuff after you're out of here.
That's awesome.
And I had some success with that, but it was, it was difficult. I was still kind of figuring out the market. The product I had went through a few iterations of me like doing one-on-ones. That was really time consuming. Then trying to package it, I think what I learned is that people need more of like a get point A to B. I have like 50 repos that are like 50 different challenges. It's a little hard to sell that like with a, yeah.
No, that's cool, man. It's funny that you say that because I remember actually this is a long time ago when I'd started this boot camp overseas, and I was thinking, could I do this like one-on-one without having a whole like program and structure? And I mean, that's essentially what Parsity became. It's like, okay, I couldn't one-on-one would be really hard, but what if we just had 10? Could I do that? Well, if I had 10, like, and they were just remote, I could probably just send them content. If they were going to do content, then like we should structure it like this. Well, they probably want another mint, and then it ends up turning into that. So I think that's funny how that you said that. Man, like what are your plans going forward? Like what do you think the podcast will look like? What Parsity will look like? I mean, you already said, which I think is a huge upgrade. And you're right, by the way, about the curriculum. Code schools are so slow to upgrade curriculum because most people that are even great engineers cannot, and I don't mean this to be rude to people, but just cannot write curriculum. It's so hard. I mean, even at Coinbase, I'm seeing that like there's a handful of folks that are able to actually build real good content, but it's so hard for most people. So I think you have one of those rare skills where you can do that and all of the other stuff. And so like, the speed at which you're going to be able to upgrade curriculum to, now to Next.js and all that kind of stuff. But what are your like thoughts and plans?
Yeah. I mean, I think what you've laid down is an excellent business foundation. So I'm trying not to like toy with too much of that, but like my big things are of course, like continuing with introducing not just cutting edge technology, because I want to make sure that it's a great job market fit, but just making sure that we're adopting things that we see as mega trends in the market. For example, Next.js being a mega trend in the market, updating things like React curriculum, and then more community engagement within Parsity too. That's one of my big things. Like I have a pretty strong community with with the other business that I'm kind of shifting away from. And I've kind of explained to them like, hey, I'm going to be focusing all my attention in Parsity. I see what we've created there, which is really helpful. A community where we do like code challenges, meetups where we talk about like really cutting edge stuff. Like for people that are really just interested in code, especially at that beginning stage where they're like, hey, I want to learn about, TRPC or something I saw on some other YouTube channel, and just doing like kind of hacking stuff together. So that's a big piece, I think, just getting more engagement in that kind of way. And then thinking about the piece after you graduate more. I think the career services at Parsity is like top notch, especially the career services head right now. She's amazing.
That's great.
I just want to expand on that more and just and see what else we can do to get community partnerships too with people.
Yeah, there's lots of room for creativity there because that post-grad experience. And I think that's the funny thing is a lot of the stuff that I was writing on LinkedIn or even the podcast, it gets a lot of traction with folks who are in that season because that season's incredibly stressful because you don't have a structure anymore. Like the boot camp, at least, I remember actually a long time ago with one of our students, this was in person. We would do like a big grad night, like a graduation demo day thing. And then the next day was kind of like the morning after. We would like take them all to lunch to kind of just celebrate quietly together. I remember one woman, she was like, I was like, how are you feeling? Excited that you graduated? She's like, no. I was like, why? She's like, well, yesterday I was a student. Today I'm unemployed. Like it's like, yeah, you don't have a structure anymore. So I think that's a great idea to be.
It's a really good point, which is exactly like why I guess I'll let the cat out of the bag here, but I'm sending an email out to all the alumni for Parsity to invite them to be in my not under the course, quote unquote, program, which is essentially access to a large set of repos in a kind of a learning list of like, here's what you can learn now. You want to go deeper into like unit testing or end-to-end testing or QA or whatever. Here's a bunch of repos to do just that. Now that you know how to code, you're proficient at it. Here's some more challenging things to do to kind of keep you in some structure and keep you, and if nothing else, give you some content to write about on LinkedIn or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. I love that. Well, cool. What else we got? Anything we didn't cover here?
I think we hit a lot. Yeah. Congrats to both of you, by the way. It's super exciting.
Thanks, man. I'm very excited for this. I feel like I can enjoy like I can enjoy the podcast. I can enjoy the community and all that. And I'm really excited to keep being a part of it. And it's a huge weight off my shoulders to know that someone like Brian's leading things up. Peter, man, thank you for just like volunteering to co-host for fun. I'm going to miss our talks, our little random catch-ups that no one else likes. Maybe, I don't know, but you and I like.
Yeah.
We could do another podcast called like the
spinoff.
Yeah.
Just
spin-off.
us. Yeah.
Like Joey from Friends. Anyway, all right. Well, I guess that does it for the pod. I can't wait to see all of the amazing guests that Brian's going to have on, and hopefully it'll be Peter and I every once in a while.
Absolutely.
If you ever want some Coinbase folks, Brian, I got you covered. We got some. If you need some blockchain podcast coverage.
Well, I failed the interview there, so that'll be an interesting. Yeah. Let's.
How long ago was that?
2-3 years ago, something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
What if we got the engineering?
Yeah, if you can get that same engineer,
Brian,
that would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Drama.
Yeah.
We could talk about your interview.
I like it.
Let's get him back. All right, y'all. Well, have a good one, and we'll see all of you develop yourself, folks, next week.
Thanks.
That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To learn more about becoming a software engineer with us, then check out Parsity.io. If you're not quite ready for that, then jump into our Dev30.xyz program, which is 30 days of working on your mindset, habits, and JavaScript skills. Totally worth it. See you next week.